Hey, what's up guys? It's Enigmahood. So there's this girl named Laci Green, and she's involved in the rational skeptic community. I've never really followed her channel, but I knew of her. And recently she decided to mention one of the comments I made in her video and called me a terrible person. Well, not specifically, but she said, look at all these terrible people, and lumped me in with a bunch of terrible people as if I'm comparable in terribleness to these pieces of shit. And, you know, this has to do with the Elliot Rodger thing. And, well, I think the best way to handle this is to respond exactly to all of the points that she makes in her video, because there's some points that I disagree with, irrespective of whether or not she mentioned me or not. And then I will also talk about the specific incident where I made that comment. So let's just get right into it.
In college, I became friends with this guy. He was kind of lonely, he was good looking, a little bit socially awkward. He pursued me romantically, very aggressively, and when I told him that I wasn't interested, he became violent. One morning, he spammed rape threats, my address, my phone number, all over my YouTube channel. He turned our mutual friends against me, he stalked me. When I moved into my first apartment on my own, he used to leave me violent drawings like a bloody knife through a heart. He'd always draw them on green post-it notes and left them square in the middle of my door, as if to tell me that he was watching me. Terrorized me for years, all because I wouldn't date him. Sound familiar?
I can definitely understand that, and there's no excuse for stalking. I'm just trying to wonder why he was able to do it for years. I mean, especially when he was making clear threats. The way you're supposed to handle that is by calling the police. Now, with that said, I do think that it's wrong to lead on guys and make them think that they're interested in them when they might just be trying to make them feel better for being lonely or whatever. I'm not saying that's the case with you, but I have seen this happen, and your story just reminds me of it. I've seen it happen to other guys. I've seen it happen to friends of mine, where a girl, you know, pities a man because he's shy and he is socially awkward. And then she'll pity him, feel sorry for him, talks to him, and then maybe not intentionally, she didn't intend to do this, but the guy gets the wrong impression, and then he is infatuated with her and falls in love with her, and then she's aghast. She's so surprised that this could happen. I would say if that wasn't your intention, it probably wasn't, you should use that incident as a learning experience not to do this again. You're not actually helping anyone by feeling sorry for the shy or socially awkward guy that only, you know, keeps to himself and eats lunch by himself, you know, if you're not interested in him. Because all you're going to do is hurt him later on. And you're going to hurt yourself later on because, of course, you got victimized. And you weren't to blame for that. Absolutely not. No one's ever to blame for those kinds of things. But it is wrong to lead a guy on intentionally. I mean, maybe you could chalk this up to ignorance, but what you should do is you should use that as a learning experience, not to do it again, not to use it as an example for guys like Elliot Rodger.
The response to Elliot Rodger's massacre has widely focused on the fact that he's a psycho and a madman, glossing over the fact that he uploaded a string of 20 videos where he repeatedly stated that the reason why he did this is because women wouldn't sleep with him. He said in plain language in his War on Women manifesto that had a woman slept with him, he never would have done this, wouldn't even consider it. And yet all we hear is a sentence or two about how he was sexually frustrated and rejected by women. You want madness? That is madness. There's a big conversation here that's being completely ignored. Whether or not he's mentally ill remains to be seen at this point, but that's not the end of the discussion.
I actually agree with that completely. I don't think it's fair or right to evaluate someone's mental health based upon a couple of videos or a written manifesto or even what he did. You might think, oh, well, he killed people. That means he's crazy. No, there's nothing to... Sane people kill all the time. In fact, I would guess that more often than not, sane people kill people far more than insane people. So I definitely agreed that really, you shouldn't be talking about mental health.
There have been 71 mass murders in the US since 1982, and 70 of them were carried out by men. Most of those are white men.
Most of those were white men. Well, what about Sung-Wee Cho? What about Elliot Rodger himself? He wasn't 100% white. He was half white, but he was also half Malaysian, if I'm not mistaken. What about that, I forgot his name, the guy who shot up the U.S. Navy Yard? You know, there are plenty of other examples where non-white men went on mass shootings. I don't even know what the point of that would be. I mean, it just seems unnecessarily racial for the point of being racial, when there's no point to even bringing that up, and it's not even completely true. I mean, mass shootings, spree shootings, are rare enough that when they finally do happen, you see a decent amount of diversity, considering the fact that whites make up the majority of this country.
This is not a coincidence. It's telling us something about our culture.
I don't think it has anything to do with culture, because you can find instances of males committing violence against females all over the world. It's not particular to any kind of culture.
Elliot hated the fact that other men were having sex when he wasn't, and he ultimately killed him to prove that he was the true alpha male.
I don't think that he killed to prove that he was the true alpha male. I think he was indignant about the fact that he wasn't getting laid, whereas uglier guys were getting laid, and he was jealous of them. And what he was trying to do was he was trying to convince himself that he was better. That since he was so indignant, usually when people are indignant about their own situation, and this goes back to all kinds of discrimination, whether it's homophobia or racism or sexism, usually you feel inferior about yourself and you're jealous of others, you're indignant. And in order to reduce the cognitive dissonance you feel about yourself, you project your own poisonous self-loathing onto others. You're convincing yourself that you're better. I don't think he was trying to prove it to anyone else. I think he was trying to convince himself that that's what he was.
Elliot also hung out on bodybuilding forums and pickup artist forums. Masculinity refers to the social expectation that anyone with a penis is raised with. Masculinity requires that men repress their emotions so that they don't appear weak. They use women for sex, that they appear physically intimidating. It also urges men to solve their problems and garner respect with aggression.
So she's trying to attach all this to social issues, that this is socially induced. I don't agree with that. I think it's biological. I mean, wouldn't it make sense that it's biological? Males were selected for it through natural selection and evolution to go out and forage in the forest, in the jungles, in the wild for food. And then he would come back and provide for his family, and his, mate would rear the children. That's how it happened in the past. And in order for that to be possible, males had to be physically different and have slightly different body chemistry. They have more testosterone. That makes them more aggressive. That makes them more violent. I don't think it really has anything to do with society as much as it has to do with biology. And we are genetically identical to our savage ancestors. Nothing has changed. We haven't implemented any kind of genetic engineering to change ourselves yet, and we haven't evolved in just a few thousand years so drastically to make any kind of difference. So we are still the same. And so we are at the mercy of our bodies, which think we're still living in the wild. And that's unfortunate, but I will contest your allegation, your assertion that it's socially induced. It's not. It's biologically induced.
Now, before the massacre, both the social worker and his parents were like, something's wrong here. So they called in law enforcement, and the sheriff was like, well, he seems kind of timid and not very violent. Nothing to see here. Aside the fact that he was, posting his plans to slaughter his peers on YouTube. Nothing to see here.
Jeez, what an idiot. At least get your facts straight. None of the YouTube videos that he posted prior to the latest one, the one where he's in his car talking about killing people, indicated any threat at all. He was just talking about loneliness and why girls don't like him. None of that is actionable. None of it. It's just worrisome. Yeah, his family was worried about him, rightfully so, because he was really lonely and depressed. And when the police came and visited him, they said that he was very polite. And since there was no probable cause, there was no reason to search his apartment. There was really nothing the police can do. I don't know why you're even pointing this out. It's not the police's fault. There was nothing that anyone could have done. There were no warning signs because lots of other guys get lonely and depressed and say, why don't girls like me, and never do anything violent about it. It happens all the time. You can't assume someone's behavior, future behavior, based upon these kinds of, quote-unquote warning signs.
The fact that Elliot was dismissed is partially because we've normalized this idea of violent masculinity. This stuff didn't raise enough red flags because the sheriff thought, hey, he's got a lot of aggressive feelings just like any other guy. It's nothing to be concerned about. Now 6 innocent people are dead.
Wrong! It has nothing to do with that. There was no evidence for violence. Are you kidding me? If a sheriff said, oh, well, he's just being violent, but, it's socially acceptable, so, whatever. Are you kidding me? He would have lost his job. There's no way that happened. Elliot, when he was interviewed by the police, was just very polite, and he gave no indication that he was a threat to anyone. It had nothing to do with violence being socially acceptable. Are you kidding me?
The emasculation that Elliot Rodgers felt so deeply ultimately amounted in him following the manual written for boys. Don't be a pussy. Do what it takes to take back control. And that's exactly what he did.
Who the hell encourages that? Don't we see on the media all the time where there's condemnation for this kind of thing? There's never any real encouragement for it other than the fact that the killer is popularized. I think what happens is the media only pays attention to violent incidents because people react to violence. People want to learn more about the people who commit violence. And so as a result, these people turn into celebrities. And that's what I was saying in my comment before, by the way, that no one pays attention to a person until they commit an act of violence, and that's a problem. But I'll get into that later.
What happens when this toxic masculinity collides with entitlement? A large part of mainstream masculinity is learning to see women as objects to have sex with them, to make them food, to date them, to do their laundry, which of course is extremely misogynistic, but elements of that are all over our culture. Just last month, a girl in Connecticut turned down a guy for prom, so he decided to stab her repeatedly in the hallways of their high school. A few years ago, a man shot 13 women in a Pittsburgh gym after vowing vengeance against females for refusing to provide him with sex and pleasure. Here we see in the extreme examples of men who think that women owe them sex. That it's their birthright or something. What happens when that angry, entitled man is armed with a gun, with a knife, with date rape drugs?
Okay, so there's, I think, equivocation going on here with the word entitlement. Now, entitlement, as far as I understand, means that you believe that you deserve something. Well, aren't we all entitled to happiness? That's normal, right? We're entitled to happiness. We deserve to be happy. So I don't think it's all that strange to say that a man also deserves to have a happy relationship with another female, if that's what he desires. He deserves that, but that does not mean the same thing as a woman has to have sex with him or has to be in a relationship with him. Like I pointed out before, it wouldn't work. Not only is it immoral and goes against the law and is wrong, but it wouldn't work anyway. So you have to distinguish between those two things. I think that every man and woman deserves to be happy and deserves to have sex. I mean, we evolved to desire sex, and when we're deprived of that, involuntary celibacy can lead to mental dysfunction. And Elliot Rodger is not the only example of this. There was also Sung-Wee Cho and Tony 48219. I'll get to them later.
Violence is one way that men attempt to maintain their power over women. That is misogyny, but it's not always extreme like this either. Think about things like street harassment, catcalling, the verbal abuse that so many women put up with online, stalking, threats, intimidation, assault, rape, physical violence. Men who act this way feel entitled to women's bodies and to their time. They're so entitled, in fact, that many of them believe that this is a sign that we put women on a pedestal. Oh.
Let me make the distinction clear. Everyone has the right to be happy. People deserve to have a loving relationship with another human being. But that doesn't mean that someone should be forced into being in a relationship with them. That doesn't mean that someone should be coerced into having sex with anyone else. These are real problems, and they need to be addressed in some way. I have some ideas which I mentioned in the other video. None of them have anything to do with forcing women to have sex or date anyone else. It wouldn't work, and it's immoral.
It's so wonderful not being seen as a full human being. And no, it's not all men who act this way. But you know what? It's way too f***ing many. Just look at all the terrible people posting their condolences and congratulations for a mass murderer on social media.
Alright, so this is the part where she posts the comment that I made. So let's just read it. I've been saying this for years. Every time you have a massacre from an introverted kid, this is the reason. Involuntary celibacy fucks with a man's mind. It's sad because no one gave a shit about him until he resorted to violence. Great kind of society we have here. No one cares about a man suffering until he starts killing people. Now the reason why I said that I've been saying this for years is because I've been saying this for years. After what Sung-Wee Cho did, after what Tony48219 did, I said the same exact thing. That this was because of involuntary celibacy. This is the reason. You guys are speculating on all this bullshit which has nothing to do with why he did what he did. With Tony48219, they kept on trying to blame it on religion because he was a Christian, and you know, even though he was a Christian and I disagreed with him on those religious issues, I did not blame religion for what he did because I recognized the pattern. When Sung-Wee Cho did what he did, everyone was so baffled and confused they had no idea. I knew immediately what it was based on the evidence. It's clear that he wanted an interpersonal relation with a female, because he was going after females, trying to talk to them, trying to form interpersonal relations with them, and he couldn't because of his social awkwardness. He didn't have the capability of doing it. So when this happened, and for once, the guy explained it in plain English, this is why I did it. I said, I've been saying this for years. And none of you fucking idiots listen to me. If you listen to me and actually address the problems instead of blaming it on this other bullshit, then maybe you could avoid some of these tragedies from happening in the future. That's why I was saying that society does not care about a man suffering until it's too late, until he actually commits the act of violence. But maybe now we can actually address the problem. But in order to address the problem, you have to recognize that there is a problem. That involuntary celibacy really does lead to mental dysfunction. Now take note, that does not mean that every single man that suffers from involuntary celibacy is going to act violently. The vast majority of the time they don't. But that doesn't mean that they aren't suffering. So when you address this problem, you're going to address lots of people's problems. Millions of men will benefit by addressing this problem. And you could possibly also prevent violence in the future. That would actually just be a bonus, because addressing this problem is beneficial to society irrespective of the violence aspect, of whether or not you're able to mitigate violence or not. I think this is the reason why people hate feminism so much, because you're only concentrating on one issue without seeing the bigger picture. There is a bigger picture involved, which involves both men and women, and there's suffering on both sides. And you're not going to be able to fully address the problems and the violence against women without also addressing the problems that men face. And there are major problems that men face, which I talked about in my other video, that a lot of feminists, unfortunately, gloss over, straw man into thinking that the problems that are being identified somehow are blaming women when they're not. So anyway, that's all I gotta say. I hope that people put aside their feminism or MRA primer for a minute and just evaluate the issues logically and rationally as possible. I know we're all people. We have emotional reactions to things. But emotion breeds irrationality. Best way to look at these issues is logically. Then you can actually start to address the problems that we face and possibly save lives. That's all I gotta say. This is Enigmahood signing off.